So as I traveled the globe and worked with leaders and I saw how much my country was spreading something, I realized I had a responsibility. So in 2012, I moved on from the nonprofit and I joined forces with my dad directly in launching Food Revolution Network to focus on food. Healthy, ethical, sustainable food for all. So we launched an online summit, interviewed some of the top food experts on the planet, shared their interviews for free in the Food Revolution Summit. And as we interviewed them, my dad knew a lot of these folks from his work, my jaw was dropping because I was hearing more and more studies, research, data that all pointed in the same direction. You know, there is a myth today that we are confused about food and that we should be confused about food because it's confusing. Now, I'm not going to argue that we're confused. 95% of the American public wants to make healthy choices at least some of the time. Only 25% of the American public feels clear about what those healthy choices are. And a lot of those people are probably wrong. But there have been over 10,000 studies published in peer-reviewed medical journals looking at the long-term impact of food on health. Serious researchers who look at the data are not fundamentally confused about the long-term health and well-being of human beings. We have an overwhelming body of data that tells us in no uncertain terms that there is a direction we need to move in, and that if we make those changes, we can save the lives of millions and millions of people. The Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation, based out of the University of Washington, conducted the largest study in world history on the causes of death and disease. They published their report called The Global Burden of Disease. They had hundreds of people working on this. They analyzed hundreds of lifestyle factors, and they looked at about 100 causes of death. And they ended up concluding that the modern industrialized diet is the leading factor behind 678,000 deaths in the United States alone every year. This means that our diet is causing more death than all of the Americans who died in World Wars I, II, Korean War, Vietnam War, both Iraq wars, Afghanistan War combined. In 1 year. But this time the enemy isn't another country or bullets. It's our own knives and forks and what we're doing with them. We're literally digging our own graves with our knives and forks. But here's the good news. That means we can change it. That means we can do something different. So what do serious researchers agree on? We need to eat less sugar and processed junk. We need to eat less chemicals with names we don't know how to pronounce. We need to eat less animal products, particularly from factory farms. And we need to eat more whole plant foods, particularly vegetables. Those simple changes can generate enormous results for very large numbers of people. Now, there are details we're still learning all the time about the microbiome and digestion, about the brain and how it works, about the role of genetics and how to turn on the good genes and turn off the bad ones. It's called epigenetics. We are learning more and more all the time about how we can optimize and finesse diet and lifestyle for abundant health. Is it best to do intermittent fasting? Is it best to fast in longer periods? Is it best to be more raw or cooked? Is it best to, include legumes or not? What's the right balance of the macronutrients, fat, carbohydrates, proteins? But here's what we know. A diet based around whole plant foods is optimal for human health in almost every case. And that can make a world of difference. And this sea of confusion is largely manufactured. My friend Dr. David Katz worked for Good Morning America as a medical correspondent for some years. He was forbidden from ever covering the same story or the same piece of advice twice. So if he did a story on how a whole foods, plant-based diet was good for health, that was it. He could never say that again. But if some new fangled theory comes down the pike that tomatoes are killing you, then he could say that, and they would get eyeballs, and they would get advertisers, and his producers would be happy. So our media industry has an investment in giving us the news, even if it's wrong. So I'm interested in us learning from history, learning from all of the studies that have been done. What we need today is not fundamentally more studies. What we need is not to know more, it's to do more with what we know. Because, let's face it, people aren't that confused. Everyone knows that we need to eat less sugar. Everyone knows we need to eat more vegetables. But we have a diabetes epidemic that is still rising. Obesity and overweight is now 70% of the population in America. 19% of our gross domestic product goes to disease symptom management. We call it healthcare. You know and I know it is not caring for health. It is managing the symptoms of disease. 19%, and that is expected to rise dramatically. The amount of money we're spending on treating Alzheimer's is expected to double in the next generation. Children born today are the first generation in this country's history to have a lower life expectancy than their parents. So we know more than ever, but we're sicker than ever. It's time to put it into action. It's time to make the revolution happen. And that's why we're here. So, as I was just preparing today before I started, somebody came up to me and she was sharing with me her grief at the state of things in the world. She said, "Do you ever feel like we're losing? Do you ever feel like it's hopeless?" And I wonder if you ever feel that way. If you ever feel like we want to have a brave face, we want to have courage, and we want to believe that something beautiful is possible. We want to have hope. But when you actually look at the facts and you see how many people are sick and suffering and the possibility of medical-induced bankruptcy for this nation and all the wars and all the guns and all the bombs and all the violence and all the climate destabilization and all the topsoil erosion and all the aquifers getting depleted and all the people who may not be able to grow food in future generations, do you ever feel despair? Do you ever feel cynical? Do you ever feel worried about the future our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids will inherit? And I think that you can't take an honest look at the data and not feel some concern about a lot of things in the world right now. I know I do. Here's what I want to say about that. I don't think we do the right thing because it's everything. I think we do the right thing because it's something. Because it's what is ours to do. Helen Keller said, "I'm only one person and I can't do everything, but just because I can't do everything does not mean I will refuse to do that which I can." And we are part of a globe. We are part of a species. And sometimes it's easy to feel not like a drop in the bucket, but more like a drop in the sea. And yet, we are so critically important. Because all that's needed for the forces of evil to win is for forces of good to do nothing. And all that's needed to turn things around is enough people saying enough is enough, and we literally shift the course of culture. And right here and right now, we are shifting the course of culture. In the food world, for example. Did you know that in the last generation, we have quintupled the number of farmers markets in the United States? Did you know that in the last 4 years, the number of Americans who identify as vegan has increased 6-fold, from 1 million to 6 million in the United States, and rising? Did you know that the number of Germans who are on a low or no meat diet in those same years has increased from 22% to 42%? Did you know that 9 states have banned gestational crates for pigs? That they have been banned throughout the entire European Union? That states are banning cages for chickens. Now you may hear that, and some of you may be informed enough to know that just because chickens are cage-free doesn't mean they're happy or healthy. But the point here is that the arc of history, as Dr. Martin Luther King said, is long, but it may bend towards justice. The point here is that when we hear about the truth, we're outraged. 94% of Americans say that animals raised for food, if animals will be raised for food, should be treated humanely, free from cruelty. Nobody would look at our modern factory farms and say that that is free from cruelty or humane. That's why we have ag-gag laws in some states where it is forbidden for people to take pictures of industrialized animal agriculture systems. The ag-gag law in the state of Iowa was just struck down at the federal level. It was found unconstitutional. You see, we deserve the truth, and we want the truth. And when we are informed with the truth, more often than not, we become wiser. More often than not, our choices become better. And the great thing about food is it is one place where we have immense power, because we can choose with every bite we take to stand for the health we want and for the world we want, and we know that it makes a difference. It's not just theory. They say you can make a difference. You do make a difference. And the wonderful thing about food is the difference you make doesn't just impact your personal health, but it also impacts our global health, and it's all connected. I think that's pretty awesome. I was just talking to a colleague of mine, Craig Watts, North Carolina. Craig was a chicken farmer. Craig inherited some land from his family, and he decided to make some money raising chickens for Purdue. He had about 80,000 birds, I believe, on his property in these giant warehouses, and he was miserable. But he was doing what Purdue said to do. He did everything by the books. He fed them the feed he was supposed to give them. He was forbidden from opening any windows or giving them any natural light, because that would stimulate more activity, which would reduce the feed conversion ratio. So he had to keep them completely enclosed. We're talking 20,000 birds in a single warehouse. They get about 1 square foot per bird. So as they get bigger, they cannot lift a single wing. They are bred to be morbidly obese, so they cannot walk. This is kind of the equivalent to a human infant by the age of 3 months, weighing about 600 pounds. That's how fast they grow now. So they can't walk, and they sit in manure. The barn is cleaned every few years. So they're sitting in the manure not only of themselves, but the past multiple generations of chickens before them. The floor is concrete, but it's actually manure. They can't walk, and they're lying in manure, and their feathers fall off because they are so sick from lying there in the manure all day long. Can you imagine the stench of this place? The birds, they're driven completely insane. And then one day, Craig's feeling pretty bad about what he's doing, but he's just trying to stay afloat and get out from under a mountain of debt from building this whole operation in the first place, when he sees an ad on television. It's Jim Purdue. Jim Purdue is saying, "We take good care of our birds, and they are happy and healthy because we love our birds. Because happy birds make healthy meat." And he sees this ad. He's like, "I'm no psychologist, but I know these birds aren't happy. I'm no vet, but I know these birds aren't healthy. And I know that this man is lying. And it's bad enough to be treating birds like this, but I'm no liar. And if I don't say something, then I'm part of the lie." So he invited Compassion in World Farming, a nonprofit organization, to come on in with cameras. Now, this was no undercover operation. This was in the light of day. He said, "Come on in. Take a look at where these birds are living." He was an award-winning producer. He'd won multiple awards with Purdue, year after year, including weeks earlier. They said he was one of their top producers. So, and they had inspections every week, so they knew what was going on. He was doing it all right. He showed birds, lying in their own feces, unable to walk. He showed dead birds lying on the floor. 5% of the birds died while they were there. So the live birds are literally surrounded, not only by feces, but by dead birds. And this video went viral. The chicken farmer who spoke out. People all over the world saw it. Purdue was not happy. They said he was a bad apple, that he was doing it all wrong. He was like, well, here's my certificates of inspection. Here's all my awards that I've been winning. You all didn't say that last week. So they tried to say that, but he pointed out that he was following their advice. In fact, their requirements, that he was forbidden from opening windows. So they tried to make it go away. They sent him to a rehabilitation program for farmers who need to learn how to do it right. He was like, it's a joke. I've seen these videos 1,000 times. He ended up getting out of the chicken farming business. He grows crops on his property now instead. And he went into becoming a consultant to help factory farmers transition. And that's what he does now. Now, Craig is a salt-of-the-earth guy. This isn't an Ivy League kind of fellow. This is a salt-of-the-earth guy who was a chicken farmer for decades. And that's what he knew. But he knows right from wrong. And he has a heck of a lot more integrity than a lot of people, almost anyone I've ever met. So Craig is an inspiration to me. He's a hero to me, just like my grandpa is a hero to me. Because every one of us has the capacity, no matter how deep we are in a system, to shift and to make a change and to inspire others to do the same. In martial arts, I took martial arts when I was a teenager, and in martial arts, there's this concept of being centered. When you're centered, you can be pushed and you'll be stable, and the push goes into the earth. But when you're not centered, then a little tap and you fall right over. I think that integrity is a little bit like that. That when we are congruent, when there is congruency between our words and our values and our actions, then we have a potency, we have a center, we have a dynamism that makes us a force to be reckoned with. Whereas when we are following the whims of the status quo, when we are eating and living in certain ways simply because it's what we inherited or what's done all around us or it's normalized, without thinking, without choosing, then we become unconscious and complicitous